My husband left our family home to a woman I had never met, never heard of, and never once seen in 32 years of marriage. He put it in his will, in plain legal language, and beside her name he left a single line of instruction for the rest of us. It said, "She knows what I did." I sat in that lawyer's small office and heard those 6 words read out loud, and the floor of my marriage simply opened up. 32 years. I would have told you, that morning, that I knew my husband the way I knew the layout of my own kitchen in the dark. By that afternoon, I understood that I had been living, all that time, on top of something I had never felt. A thing my husband had buried so carefully, so completely, that even his wife of 3 decades had walked over it every single day and never heard it move. My name is Margaret Ellison. Everyone has always called me Maggie. I am 61 years old, and I worked for almost 30 years as the secretary of an elementary school here in Des Moines, Iowa, a job that mostly involved sick children and lost mittens and the small, ordinary machinery of a quiet life. My husband Glenn died last winter. I am going to tell you who the stranger in his will was and what my husband did long before I ever knew him, because the answer rewrote not just his life, but my understanding of every ordinary year we ever spent together. I need you to understand who Glenn was, or rather, who I believed Glenn was, because the size of the secret is only clear against the size of the man I thought I had married. Glenn was, by every measure I had, an ordinary man, and I want to be clear that in my mouth, ordinary is a word of love. He was a maintenance supervisor for the county for most of his working life. He was steady. He was mild. He was a little frugal, a little quiet. The sort of husband who checked the smoke detectors and changed the oil, and never once in 32 years gave me a dramatic evening. We raised 2 children in that house. We had a good, calm, unremarkable marriage, and at 61, having watched plenty of other kinds, I will tell you that good, calm, and unremarkable is a rare and precious thing to be handed, and I knew it, and I was grateful. There was one thing about Glenn, one only, that I had always filed away as simply a feature of him. Glenn did not talk about his life before me. We had met when he was already 34. He had a whole adulthood behind him before I came along, and he was vague about it in a way I had long ago stopped noticing. A rough patch in his younger years, he would say, if it came up. A hard time. He did not like to look back. I had decided decades ago that everyone is entitled to a closed door or two, and I had let his stay closed. I did not know that the entire rest of this story was on the other side of it. I tried, in the early years, the way a young wife does. I would ask, gently, about his 20s, about the friends he must have had, the places he had lived, and Glenn would give me something small and true-sounding and a little flat, and then he would turn the conversation as smoothly as a man closing a drawer. After enough years, you stop opening a drawer that will not open. I want to be clear that this never felt like coldness or distance in our marriage. Glenn was warm with me, present with me, here with me. It was only the past he kept sealed, and a present that good will make you generous about a past you cannot see. I decided that whatever had happened to my husband before me, he had walked out of it and built something gentle on the other side, and that the gentle thing was mine, and that I did not need the rest. I have thought a great deal, this past year, about how much can fit inside a drawer a loving wife decides not to open. Glenn was sick for about a year before he died, so his death, when it came, was not a shock. The will reading, 10 days after the funeral, I expected to be a formality. It was not a formality, and I am going to tell you exactly how the bottom fell out. I should tell you that Glenn, in that last year of being sick, was different in one small way I noticed at the time and did not understand. He grew. Not afraid exactly. Glenn was never a man who showed fear, but careful, methodical. He spent that year putting things in order with a quiet, steady focus, the paperwork and the accounts and the small arrangements, and I had thought, tenderly, that this was just my organized husband being organized about the one thing left to organize. I know now that he was doing something else in those months. He was making sure that the 35-year repair did not die with him. He was building the will so that the last payment would be made, whether he lived to make it or not. The calm I watched in my dying husband that year was not only acceptance, it was a man finishing his work. We were all there, myself, our son, our daughter, in the lawyer's office, and most of the will was exactly what we expected. The savings, the car, the small, ordinary distributions of an ordinary life, all of it to me and the children, all of it unsurprising. And then the lawyer turned a page, and his voice changed slightly, the way a voice does when it is about to read something it knows will land hard. And he read the clause about the house. Our house. The house on Linden Street, the house where my children had grown up, where I had imagined living out the rest of my life, was not left to me. It was left, in full, to a woman named Loretta Hayes. And the lawyer read Glenn's accompanying instruction, the one line my husband had insisted be included. The house on Linden Street is to go to Loretta Hayes. She knows what I did. Maggie, I am sorry. Please let her have it. I want to tell you what that room felt like. My daughter made a sound like she had been struck. My son stood up, then sat back down, not knowing what to do with his own body. And I just sat there, very still, holding my purse in my lap like a woman waiting for a bus, while my mind ran the name Loretta Hayes against 32 years of memory and came back, every time, with nothing. Nothing at all. My husband had given our home to a ghost. The lawyer, to his credit, did not rush us. He let the room sit in its silence. And then my son asked the question all three of us were holding, the only question there was. He asked who Loretta Hayes was, and the lawyer looked down at his papers, and then back up, and said that he did not know. That Glenn had set up this part of the will privately, years earlier, that Glenn had been entirely clear and entirely calm about it, and had declined to explain it, even to his own attorney. He said Glenn had told him only one thing about the arrangement. He said Glenn had told him, "My wife will be hurt by this, and then she will understand it. She is a better person than the situation is going to look." I sat in that office and heard that my husband had predicted, in advance, the exact afternoon I was now living through, had known it would wound me, had known I would be sitting in this chair stunned, and had still chosen to let it happen this way, trusting me to walk through the hurt and come out the far side. I did not know yet whether to be moved by that trust or destroyed by it. My children had a theory before we even left the parking lot. It is the theory anyone would have. And for 3 days, I am ashamed to say, I believed it too. An affair, a secret woman, a double life. It is where the mind goes, and it went there fast, and my children went there faster. My daughter was already, in the car, furious on my behalf, talking about lawyers and contesting the will, and what kind of man hides a woman for 30 years. And I sat in the passenger seat and let the idea cut me, because it did cut me. The thought that my calm, mild, ordinary Glenn had kept a Loretta somewhere all along, that the simple, honest marriage I had been so grateful for had a hidden room with another woman in it. That thought took my steady 32 years and made them feel, for 3 days, like a set I had been living on without knowing. But I did not contest the will, and I did not call my daughter's lawyer, and I will tell you why. It was that one line. She knows what I did. An affair is not a thing you did. An affair is a thing you do, ongoing, a relationship. The grammar was wrong. My husband had not written, "She knows what I felt," or "She and I have a history." He had written what I did, a single act, finished, in the past, something done. And underneath my hurt, the part of me that had been married to Glenn for 32 years and knew his careful, precise mind, that part kept saying, "This is not an affair. This is something else. Find out what it is before you let it poison everything." I want to tell you about the longest night of those 3 days, because it is the night the marriage I had was on trial. I lay awake in our bed, on my side of it, with the other side empty and cold, and I let myself do the cruel arithmetic. 32 years. If there had been another woman all that time, then what had I actually had? Was every anniversary a performance? Every quiet, contented Sunday a thing he was getting through? I lay there and felt 32 years threaten to dissolve, to turn retroactively into something thin and false. And I understood, in that dark, why my daughter wanted to burn the will and salt the ground. It is not really about a house. It is about whether your own life was real. But somewhere toward morning, exhausted, I kept returning to the man himself, to Glenn actually fixing the gutter, Glenn actually holding my hand in the hospital when our daughter was born, Glenn actually here, for 32 years, completely here. And I found I could not make the affair story fit the man. The story fit the situation, it did not fit him. And I decided to trust the man over the situation for just long enough to learn the truth. So I did not fight the will. I went looking for Loretta Hayes instead. It did not take long, because Glenn, in his careful way, had not actually hidden her. He had simply never pointed at her. She was findable. Loretta Hayes was a woman about my own age, a widow, living 2 hours away in a small town in southern Iowa. And the first hard fact I learned about her, the fact that began to turn the whole picture, was the year she had become a widow. Loretta Hayes had lost her husband 35 years ago. Her husband's name had been Carl. And Carl Hayes had died, at the age of 29, in an accident, 35 years ago, which was a year before I had ever met Glenn, in the rough patch of his younger years that he never, ever discussed. I remember sitting in my car, in a parking lot, the afternoon I confirmed that date, and feeling the whole shape of the thing shift under me. Because a widow does not undo a marriage. A man does not hide a 30-year affair with a woman whose husband died 35 years ago and whom he connected to a single finished act in the past. The grammar of "what I did" suddenly had somewhere to live, and I understood, sitting in that car, that whatever I was about to learn, it was not going to be the betrayal my children were braced for. It was going to be older, and it was going to be sadder, and it was going to belong to a chapter of Glenn's life that had been closed and sealed before I had ever shaken his hand. I sat there for a long time. Part of me, I will admit, wanted to turn the car around and not learn it at all, to let Loretta have the house and let the locked drawer stay locked forever. But I had been married to a man who spent 35 years refusing to look away from a hard thing. It would have been a poor way to honor him to look away from this one. I drove down to that small town. I had written Loretta a letter first, a careful one, telling her who I was and asking, simply, if she would be willing to tell me the truth, because my husband had not left me enough of it. She wrote back 2 words, "Please come." And when I sat down across from Loretta Hayes in her small, neat living room, she told me what my husband did, 35 years ago, and what he had been doing, silently, every year since. 35 years ago, Glenn was a young man, 28 years old, and he was driving home late one night on a county road, and he was tired and, by his own account, the account he eventually gave Loretta, he looked away from the road for the length of a breath. And in that breath, his truck drifted, and there was another vehicle, and there was a man changing a tire on the shoulder of that road. The man was Carl Hayes, and Carl Hayes did not survive the night. I am going to be careful here, because this is the heart of it and it deserves care. What my husband did was not a crime in the way the word usually means. There was an investigation 35 years ago, and it concluded what it concluded. A tragic accident, a moment of ordinary fatigue, no alcohol, no recklessness, the kind of catastrophe that the law does not send a man to prison for. Glenn was not charged with anything. In the eyes of the law, my husband was simply a young man who had been part of a terrible accident and was free to go on and live his life. And he did go on. He went on, a year later, to meet me. And he never, in the 32 years that followed, told me that a man had died under the wheels of his truck, and that the man had left behind a young widow named Loretta and 2 small children. Loretta told me about that night slowly and gently, watching my face, because she understood she was handing me something that would change shape every memory I owned. She told me that the investigation had been thorough and that no one, not the police, not Carl's own family, had ever treated Glenn as anything but a young man caught inside a tragedy. She told me she had sat in the same courtroom as Glenn, 35 years ago, a widow at 26 with 2 children under 5, and that she had looked at the shaking 28-year-old across the room and felt, even then, even in the worst grief of her life, that she was not looking at a villain. She was looking at someone whose life had also just ended in a different way. I asked her how she could possibly have felt that then, with her husband a week in the ground. And Loretta said something I have not stopped thinking about. She said, because a careless man would have looked relieved when they let him go. Glenn looked like they had just handed him a sentence, and he had. He just had to serve it himself. But here is what Loretta told me next, and it is the thing that has changed how I grieve my husband. Glenn could not be punished by the law, and so Glenn had quietly, privately, for 35 years, sentenced himself. Loretta told me that a few months after Carl's death, the money had started. Anonymous at first, an envelope, then a regular arrangement through a bank, never a name attached. Money, every single month for 35 years. It had paid Loretta's mortgage in the hardest years. It had, she said, and here her voice broke, it had put both of Carl's children through college, the children Carl never got to raise. For 3.5 decades, my husband had taken a portion of every paycheck of his ordinary frugal county job and sent it, silently, to the family of the man he had killed. The frugality I had always assumed was just his nature, the careful eye on every dollar, the modest house, the old cars. It was not only nature. Part of it was a man quietly running a 35-year act of repair and making sure his own family never went without while he did it. And Loretta told me one more thing. About 15 years ago, the anonymous arrangement had a name attached to it for the first time because Glenn had finally, after 20 years, written to her. Not to ask forgiveness, she said. He had been very clear about that. He wrote that he did not believe he was owed forgiveness and was not writing to collect any. He wrote only to tell her who he was, so that she would know the help had not come from a charity or a stranger, but from the man responsible, and so that she could refuse it if she chose. She had not refused it, and from then on, for 15 years, Glenn and Loretta had exchanged a few careful letters a year. Not a friendship exactly, something with no name. Two people connected forever by the worst night of both their lives, checking, quietly, that the other one was surviving it. I asked Loretta the question that had been burning in me since her living room door opened. I asked her if she had forgiven him. And she was quiet for a long moment, and then she gave me an answer more honest than the easy one. She said she did not think forgiveness was even the right word for what had happened between her and my husband, because forgiveness, the way people usually mean it, has an end to it, a moment where the thing is set down and finished. She said what she and Glenn had was not that. It was something that never finished, that both of them carried every single day for 35 years, and that the carrying itself had slowly become a kind of strange companionship. She said, I did not forgive your husband, Maggie. I came to respect him. There is a difference, and over 35 years the difference stopped mattering very much. And then she said the thing that undid me. She said, he never once let himself off the hook. Not in a single letter. Most people who do a wrong thing spend their life trying to feel better about it. Your husband spent his life making sure he never did. I want to be honest about the days after I came home from Loretta's living room, because they were not simple, and the simple version would be a lie. There was grief, and the grief was new and strange, because it was grief for a man I had already buried, but a different man than the one I had buried. A man with a whole hidden room of suffering in him that I had never been allowed into. And there was, I will admit it, anger, because here is the thing I kept coming back to. Glenn had told Loretta, a stranger, a woman 2 hours away, the widow of the man he killed. Glenn had eventually given her the truth. And me? His wife? The woman who slept beside him for 32 years, who would have held him through every hard night of it? Me, he had given 32 years of careful silence. For a while, that hurt more than the secret itself. I felt like the last room in my own husband's house, the one room he kept locked. But the anger did not survive, and I will tell you what dissolved it, because it matters. I made myself imagine it from inside Glenn. I made myself picture a young man, 29 years old, carrying a thing that enormous, meeting a kind, ordinary woman, falling in love, and standing at the edge of telling her, and understanding, correctly, that to tell me was to hand me the weight too. That every dinner of our marriage would have a dead man at the table. That our children would grow up in a house with a ghost in it. Glenn made a decision, and I have come to believe it was the wrong decision, but I can no longer call it a selfish one. He decided to carry it alone, so that I would not have to carry it at all. He gave Loretta the truth, because the truth was a debt he owed her. He gave me the silence because the silence, he believed, was a gift. He was wrong, but he was wrong in the direction of love, and that is a thing I have found I can forgive. And then I had to do the hardest part, which was to take 32 years and look at them all again, because everything had a second meaning now. The way Glenn flinched, always, every single time, at the sound of a car horn or a screech of brakes, I had thought he was just jumpy. The fact that he would not drive at night if there was any way around it, that he had quietly arranged our whole life so that someone else did the late driving, I had thought it was poor night vision. The frugality, the closed door over his younger years, his particular tenderness every year on one specific date in the autumn, a date I had never been able to attach to anything, a day he was always quiet and gentle and a little far away. I know now what that date was. It was the anniversary. For 32 years, my husband had observed, in total silence, in our own home, the anniversary of the worst thing he had ever done, and I had sat across the breakfast table from his grief and thought he was simply tired. The man had been holding a mountain the entire time, and he had held it so steadily, so quietly, that the person closest to him in all the world had felt nothing but the ordinary ground. There was one memory that came back to me with a force that put me in a chair. About 20 years into our marriage, our own son, then a teenager, was in a minor car accident. A fender, a stop sign, no one hurt at all, the kind of thing teenagers walk away from laughing. And I remembered that Glenn, when we got the call, had gone a color I had never seen on him, gray and bloodless, and had not been able to speak for almost a minute, and had then driven to that scene at a speed that frightened me. I had thought, at the time, that he was simply a frightened father, and he was. But I understand now that he was also a man for whom a phone call about a car and a road and a family member was not an ordinary fear. It was the precise shape of the worst night of his life, ringing again. He had lived, for 35 years, with that particular terror wired directly into him, and I had been standing right next to it, and I had read it as nothing more than a dad who loved his kids. I did love how much he loved our children. I just never knew the dark, specific room that some of that love was furnished from. Here's what I decided to do, and I made the decisions slowly, and I believe they were right. The first decision was the house. My children wanted me to fight for it. The law might well have let me. I did not fight for it. I gave Loretta Hayes the house on Linden Street, exactly as Glenn had asked, because once I understood what it was, I understood that it was not a betrayal of me. It was the last installment of a 35-year debt, the final payment my husband did not live long enough to make himself, and he had trusted me. That line, "Maggie, I am sorry, please let her have it." He had trusted me to be the kind of woman who would finish the repair for him. I decided to be that woman. I did not want a house bought back from a 35-year guilt. I moved into something smaller. It is enough. It is, in fact, more than enough. My daughter and I had a hard conversation about that house, and I want to include it, because I think the disagreement in it is one many families would have. She argued, and not unreasonably, that I had given 32 years to that marriage, and that the house was the physical proof of those years, and that handing it to Loretta meant handing a stranger my own life's work. And I told her that I had thought the same thing for about 3 days, and then I had understood something. The house was not the proof of my marriage. The marriage was the proof of my marriage. The 32 years were not stored in the drywall on Linden Street. They were stored in me, and in her brother, and nothing Glenn put in a will could move them. The house was something else. The house was the last debt of a different story, an older story, one that had been running quietly underneath ours the whole time. I told my daughter that I did not want to live the rest of my life in a building that I knew, every single morning, was the unpaid debt of a dead man's conscience. Letting Loretta have it was not losing something of mine. It was finally letting Glenn finish. The second decision was Loretta herself. I could have given her the house and never seen her again, and no one would have blamed me. But I found that I did not want that. Loretta and I are the two people alive who knew Glenn most completely. She knew the buried half, I knew the daily half, and between the two of us is the only complete picture of him that exists. So we have stayed in contact. Not a friendship exactly. Glenn was right that some bonds have no name, but two older widows, connected forever through one man and one terrible night, checking on each other. Carl's children, grown now, with children of their own, know the whole story at last. They do not hate my husband. I had braced for them to hate him, and instead what they feel mostly is something complicated and quiet, because they were raised, unknowingly, on the steady guilt of the man who took their father, and it is a strange thing to owe your education to your father's death. There was one more thing, and Loretta gave it to me, and it is the most precious object I now own. She gave me Glenn's letters. 15 years of the few careful letters a year that my husband had written to her. And I read them, all of them, over many evenings, and in them I finally met the locked room of my husband. In those letters, Glenn was not the mild, quiet, ordinary man of our breakfast table. In those letters, he was raw and articulate and devastated and humble in a way I had never seen, writing to the one person on earth he did not have to perform fine for. And reading them, I did not feel like the last locked room anymore. I understood finally that Glenn had not kept me out because he did not trust me. He had kept me out because he loved our ordinary life too much to put a ghost in it, and he had needed, somewhere, one place to set the weight down, and he had chosen the only place that could not be poisoned by it, because it was already, for Loretta, poisoned. They carried it together so that the rest of us would not have to carry it at all. It was the wrong choice, but my God, I understand it now. One of those letters I have nearly memorized. It was not a long one. In it, Glenn wrote to Loretta about our daughter's wedding, which had happened that year. He wrote, carefully, almost apologetically, that he had had a happy day, that he had walked his daughter down an aisle and felt joy, and that he needed to confess to the one person who would understand the strange shame of it. That he did not feel entitled to that joy, that every good day of his life arrived with Carl Hayes's name attached to the bill. And Loretta had written back, she showed me her copy, and told him that Carl would not have wanted his death to forbid another man's daughter a happy wedding, and that punishing himself by refusing joy was not a payment Carl had ever asked for. Reading that exchange, I finally understood the deepest layer of why Glenn never told me. It was not only to spare me the wait, it was that Glenn did not believe he was allowed to be simply, uncomplicatedly happy with me, and if he had told me, he would have had to watch me try to give him that permission, and he could not have borne being given it. Loretta could write him those words because Loretta had standing. I would only have been his wife, loving him, wanting him happy. He could not look at that, so he kept me on the side of his life that was allowed to be light. A year has passed since the will reading. Loretta lives in the house on Linden Street now. I have been back to visit it, which I thought would hurt and somehow does not. There is something right about Carl Hayes's widow growing old in rooms paid for, in the end, by the man responsible. My children have come, slowly, to a kind of peace with it. My daughter, who was the angriest, is now the one who drives me down to see Loretta. The whole story is out in the open, and the open air has been kinder to it than I expected. Secrets rot. This one, finally unburied, has mostly just turned, quietly, into something the two families can stand to hold. Loretta and I had one more conversation that I want to tell you about, on the porch of the Linden Street house last autumn, near that date in the fall, the anniversary, the one Glenn had always observed in silence. We sat out there together, the two women who had loved and respected and been bound to the same difficult, decent man, and we did not say a great deal. We did not need to. And I realized, sitting there, that Glenn had given me one last thing in that will that I had not understood until that exact moment. He had not only paid his debt, he had introduced me, from beyond his own death, to the one other person on earth who could stand on a porch with me on that particular day and not need a word of explanation. He had made sure that when he was gone, neither of us would have to carry the anniversary entirely alone anymore. I do not think that was an accident. Glenn did not do things by accident. He had spent 35 years thinking about other people's burdens. He thought about ours too, right up to the last page of the last document he ever signed. And I think about my husband differently now, and not in the way you might assume. I do not think of him as a man with a dark secret. I think of him as a man who did one terrible, ordinary human thing on one tired night at the age of 28, and who then spent every remaining day of his life, 35 years of days, quietly, anonymously, without ever once being thanked or seen or credited, trying to repair the unrepairable. He could not give Carl Hayes back his life. So he gave Carl Hayes's children their education, and Carl Hayes's widow her home, and he asked for nothing, and he told no one, and he would have taken it to his grave if a will did not have to be read out loud. That is not the story of a man with a guilty secret. That is the story of the most relentlessly responsible person I have ever known. I was married to him for 32 years, and I did not know the best thing about him. I know it now. I want to leave you with the two things this taught me. The first is about the people we are certain we know. I would have sworn, at 61 years old, that there was nothing left to learn about a husband of 32 years, that a marriage that long simply uses up all the secrets. I was wrong. The people closest to you, the steady and ordinary ones especially, may be carrying things you have never felt, precisely because they have decided to carry them well. The mild husband, the quiet father, the calm friend who never seems to have a crisis. Do not assume the smooth surface means there is nothing underneath. Sometimes the smoothness is the achievement. Sometimes a person is calm not because their life was light, but because they have spent decades with enormous private effort, refusing to let their weight fall on you. Look at the steady ones in your life with a little more wonder. You may be standing on top of a mountain and calling it flat ground. The second thing is about guilt and what to do with the thing you cannot undo. My husband did something at 28 that could never be made right. You cannot give a man his life back, and Glenn knew that with total clarity. And he did not let the impossibility of full repair become an excuse to make no repair at all. He could not undo it, so he spent 35 years doing the next thing, and the next, and the next. The mortgage, the tuition, the quiet letters, every small act of mending that was actually within his reach. If you are carrying a guilt over something that cannot be undone, I want you to hear what my husband's whole silent life says. You are not released from repair just because perfect repair is impossible. Do the reachable thing. Do it quietly. Do it for as long as you live. Expect no thanks and no audience. It will not erase what happened, but it is the difference between a guilt that destroys a person and a guilt that, somehow, slowly, builds two families a way to survive. If this story landed for you, drop the word stranger in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. Two small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. First, do not mistake a calm surface for an empty depth. The steady, unremarkable, never-in-crisis people in your life are not necessarily people whose lives have been easy. Very often, they are people who have done an enormous and invisible amount of work to keep their burdens from touching you. Before you decide someone has a simple inner life, consider that their calm may be the single most effortful thing they do. Honor the quiet ones. They are frequently carrying the most. Second, when you have done a harm that can never be fully undone, do not let that impossibility excuse you from the repair that is possible. You cannot give back a life, a lost year, an unringable bell, and the temptation facing that is to do nothing, because nothing you do will be enough. But not enough and nothing are worlds apart. The reachable, partial, unglamorous acts of mending, done steadily, done humbly, done for as long as it takes, are not a failure to fix the unfixable. They are the only honest response to it, and over a lifetime, they add up to something that can genuinely hold the people you hurt. Even the quiet ones carry mountains. I'll see you next time.